Well, it's a pleasure to speak to you, John, particularly for this film because I love this movie just as I love the TV series. And I've got to start talking about the AT-ATs and what was it like
Mhm.
creating that sequence? Obviously, we see Mando on their feet, on top of them. You got a hard act to follow with The Empire Strikes Back in that film. So, what
Yeah.
was it like putting that sequence together?
Um, well, Hal and I both had a little taste of it in Rogue One, so we had some walkers there. Um, so it was kind of carrying on some of the things that we learned from that. Um, it's interesting. I think that the work in Empire Strikes Back is spectacular and groundbreaking and iconic. And your first thought when you are trying to depict new media of Walker as well, just match what we did in Empire. But one of the things we learned during Rogue One was that the walk cycle on the Walker looks too fast by today's standards. It kind of doesn't look like they're big enough. So I think we ended up slowing it down to about half of its speed in Empire to get it to have that sort of big, lumbering thing. Um, and then because of the limited space that these walkers are in and limited visibility, we tried to include atmospherics so that we weren't necessarily seeing for miles there. That uh, we framed a lot of shots very close to them to help make them look enormous. And I think the walkers are cool designs. It was a really good idea, and I thought it was kind of fun to be able to kind of play in that arena again.
Yeah, it was an amazing way to kick the film off. And then to go later in the film, we obviously see Mando on a stap and those battle droids and, a bit of
Mhm.
a full circle moment for you as you started out on the prequels. So was that quite special
True.
to revisit those characters and those weapons and obviously putting a little bit of a new spin on them in that palace?
Yeah, yeah. What this has been part of John's ambit from the beginning is of the Mandalorian is to try to um, take things that we may have seen in the past, but upgrade them in some way. And when there's something that was maybe a little unloved and or underutilized in the its first appearance, is to, hey, how can we upgrade these things to make the really cool version of something? And maybe an example of that is the Amon in the film. They were a pretty minor background creature that you saw in Jabba's palace, and you know, like it's a cool idea, but the design's a little goofy, and the challenge here was, all right, we're going to put them front and center. We're going to make them close-up characters, and they got to be intimidating and scary, and like, how do you do that with a design like that? And we enjoyed those sorts of challenges, and that was a lot of fun. And I'm happy with the way that like those characters turned out. As silly as the design might be, I think they come off as being kind of fearsome and scary, and yeah, I do enjoy the challenge there.
Yeah, amazing. And the Razor Crest looks stunning in this film. And I've read that you shot that with miniatures on a mini version of the volume. So what was the thought
Yeah.
process behind that and bringing that ship to life in that way in this film?
Well, back on season one, John wanted to explore doing miniature work with miniature Razor Crest, and that was super fun. I started my career as a model maker and motion control cameraman, and I used to build some of my own motion control equipment. And you know, at that time, I think that was in 2018, we didn't have we didn't have a motion control stage anymore. It was all gone. Um, and if we wanted to do that sort of thing, we are going to have to build something or contract with another company. But we didn't have the funds to really consider jobbing that out to another company because it's a very tightly constrained budget, um, and the budget had already been approved based on doing all the stuff with computer graphics. And part of the reason why we don't do a lot of miniature work anymore is that it's generally a little bit more expensive than doing it in computer graphics. And clients have gotten used to being able to change things up into the last minute. But we got a buy-in from a director who really wanted to see some of this stuff, um, and with 3D printing and CNC routers and that kind of thing, some of the bits and pieces have become commoditized and relatively inexpensive. And so I have a little shop in my garage where I can fabricate things, and the challenge of building a motion control system seemed like, oh, this actually be really fun to do. And, I know how to do that stuff. That's kind of how I began my career. So let's dive in and do it. So that was tremendous fun. We did a bunch of shots throughout the streaming series with it. And then we wanted to continue that for the feature film, continue using the miniatures. But in this case, talked to John Goodson about let's do an upgrade. Let's build a 48-inch model of the Razor Crest with a great deal more detail so we can get in tighter and get um, tighter, better shots with it. And then I upgraded the motion control system. I'd always wanted to have a crane to do more elaborate shot designs. And so I built a boom arm and had all the same degrees of freedom that the Dijksterflex had originally. Hal really appreciated that because some of the limits of what we were able to do with the pan tilt head on a slider kind of style of motion were lifted, and we could do more elaborate shot designs. And
Yes.
yeah, then the Razor Crest being this bare metal spacecraft, it's all about reflections in the same way that Mando and his helmet are. And the best way to do that in arbitrary environments is to have something that where you can control what it is reflecting. And having that miniature LED volume was something I couldn't afford to do on the streaming series, but on a feature budget, we kind of worked it into the budget and the schedule. And yeah, that was a real game changer. We were able to do these, I think, really beautiful shots with the, arbitrary synthetic environments reflected inside of the ship. And I'm really happy with how those shots turned out.
Yeah, it looks phenomenal. And that is so fascinating. And of course, Grogu, a big part of what makes him so charming is that puppeteering aspect. But obviously,
Hmm.
VFX do have to step in every now and again. So, how challenging is it to step in when needed, but to also still allow that puppet's performance to really shine through and to keep that charm of the character?
Well, methodology was always, you know, uh, use use the puppet wherever you can.
Mm.
And even in cases where something was on the cusp, where the legacy puppeteer folks would say, I don't know, this one's kind of on the cusp. It's like it might work, it might not work. It's like, well, let's try it. Let's try it. Because the worst case is you've got something that's really good reference for us. And there were times where we had to use the CG version of Grogu because there just wasn't a good way of shooting something with the puppet. Uh, but they most of the time when you're seeing them, that's the puppet, and the CG is for things that just weren't able to get with the puppet. And then we're going to a lot of effort to make sure that everything that we're doing is feels like the puppet. Even things like the wiggly ears and the way he walks, trying to make that so it doesn't feel like you're suddenly looking at something different.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, the film culminates with that amazing battle between Mando and the massive guard droids. And, from a
Mhm.
viewer's perspective, it seemed to almost be a blend of stop motion and VFX. So, what was the balance between the practical and visual effects there? And how challenging was it to
Yeah.
make it look the way it does, that kind of old school filmmaking? It's just classic Star Wars.
Yeah. Well, that John was definitely interested in keeping some of the retro techniques going. And we talked about wanting to do a stop motion sequence. And, the one that immediately suggested itself was the battle with the big droids. And from the very beginning, we as soon as we decided that yeah, we want to try and see if we can do this sequence, it's going to be about 2 minutes long. Going to end up being 30 something shots. That's pretty substantial undertaking for stop motion. We got Tippett and their crew involved very early on, even in the ideation stage of what does the battle look like and what are some of the gags we're going to do. Phil Tippett himself was directly involved in planning some of the choreography there. And then, the designs on the droids, we didn't make it easy on them. There are a massive number of articulated pieces on them. Besides that, they've got three arms, but all these armor plates that move and all have to be animated. The guys at Tippett said that was one of the most complicated things they've ever done.
Wow, that is incredible. And you mentioned Rogue One. That obviously finished with a great aerial battle with X-Wings,
Mhm.
as this film does. Obviously, George Lucas, he was the master at putting together those kind of amazing aerial battles. But to be working on those now, what's the secret of these great X-Wing fights that you've now worked on a couple of times to really make them look as good as they do in this film?
Some of it is try not to repeat yourself. It's to like, how can we add a new twist to this, that's something that we haven't really seen before. Um, and th then do good flight dynamics, good execution on the shots, try and make them, you know, look good and clear. Clear storytelling is important, that you always kind of know who's where and what's going on so that it's never just a confusing mass. It's good, clear storytelling.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, John, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work you put into this amazing film and all the other projects you've worked on. It's
Yeah,
been
thank
such a
you.
pleasure to speak to you.
All right, likewise.